down behind a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
Very pleased to have Peps Mccrea in the studio with me, in the virtual studio. Peps is the Dean of Learning Design at Ambition Institute, and in his spare time has found time to write a series of what he calls high impact teaching books, the latest of which is this little gem, Motivated Teaching. And like all of Pep's books, it's an absolute masterpiece of brevity and concision. He manages to pack so much information into such little space that pretty much 4 or 5 times a page you'll be going, my goodness, that's useful. Peps, thanks for talking to us. And can you tell us a little bit about the how you got into your writing these books and something about your distinctive, concise style?
Sure. Well, firstly, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on, David. Really excited to be talking to you, but also to be having a little bit of a chat about these books. Because, you know, as a fellow author, you will know just how big a part of your life they end up occupying. I started the kind of origin story of the High Impact series goes back about 8 years ago or so, where Stephen Lockyer, Mr. Lockyer on Twitter, was round at mine for, I think, barbecue.
Oh, Lord. I think we might have lost Peps.
In a year.
Oh, Peps, we lost you just as we were about to hear about the barbecue story.
Yeah. So Stephen Lockyer was round, short story. We had a bit of like, it was the days where self-publishing was just like beginning to emerge, and we had a bit of a bet who could produce the most books in a year. And I think we decided we were going to try and write 10 in a year. And I was like, yeah, I'll take this on, no problem. Of course, like, yeah, so what are we, 8 years later or so, and we've managed just to produce the third. I'm a little bit behind on schedule, but still massively enjoying the process. And actually a bit of a hat tip to Stephen Lockyer out there for like getting me started. And really, at that stage, I was a senior lecturer at the University of Brighton running the PGCE secondary maths course there. And one of the things that kind of frustrated me a little bit about my job was that every time I'd go out and observe a student or talk to them, it would often come back to the same thing, that their lesson planning wasn't quite good enough. And that was one of the roots of the kind of causes of like underperformance, or not underperformance, but that's where the highest leverage intervention I felt there could be. And so at that stage, I looked around and couldn't find any books on lesson planning and decided to simply write one. And that's really been the story of all my books, I suppose, is I've got to a point where I've realized or recognized that there's something a bit missing from the library, as it were, and decided just to write my own.
You're right, and I'm very pleased we are too that you've done that. So there is lots of, for instance, lots of material out there about motivation, but it's disparate, and you've collected it all together. And if you don't mind, I've been reading through, and I've got a couple of questions. So you, if you're happy to take them. So the first thing is, the book is organised around 5 central motivational drivers. Can you say a little bit about what those 5 drivers are?
Sure. If I can remember, you might have to help me. Yeah. So the 5 drivers are, okay, this is a good bit of retrieval practice.
I'm going to be checking.
Yeah. The first one is secure success. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And really about helping your pupils to develop.
So ensuring success there. The tension as we wait for the second driver is palpable. So we were waiting with bated breath for the second driver.
The technology is really good at just pausing at the right cliffhanger moments. So yeah, secure success, about helping pupils to develop a sense that they can do it. The second one is run routines, which from an economical perspective is about reducing the cost of actually investing in an action or an opportunity. And then the next 2 drivers are sort of more social in nature. So they are nudging norms, which is all about social norms, and then building belonging, again, what it says in the tin. And then the final driver is called, what's the final driver?
Do you want a tip?
Yeah. Oh, it begins with B. Boost buy-in. Yeah, which is really a way of trying to harness the power of autonomy in the school environment where autonomy isn't always like the easiest thing to offer.
Okay, and the observant amongst you will have noticed that these all alliterate, and which makes them really easy to remember, doesn't it?
Well, in theory.
So the one of the things that you say, and I think it's a really good point, is that you make the point that motivation is specific to context. It isn't a general skill. Can you tell us a little bit more about that idea?
Yeah, so I think that the more I read around this subject, the kind of more I began to understand that it really is motivation is best thought of like as a inclination towards investing in a particular opportunity, and the opportunity itself and the environment in which you're in, or the situation that you're in, really changes or can change quite drastically your motivation towards something. And so rather than often in school, I myself, and I've heard other people talk a little bit about, little Billy is motivated or not. Actually, that's perhaps not the most accurate way to think about motivation. And instead, it's better to think about whether little Billy is motivated towards a particular thing in a particular situation.
Okay, and which really makes sense with the first of your drivers being about success. And I've written in the past about that success has to be first in whatever it is that you're doing. If you don't believe that success is possible, if you haven't experienced success, then everything else is a lot more difficult. And that's certainly something that you seem to endorse in your book. But curiously absent perhaps, and you make the point that some of the things that people might be expecting to find in this book are ideas around trying to make lessons more enjoyable, more fun, and giving lots of rewards and that sort of thing. But you've purposely jettisoned those ideas. Can you say why they didn't fit into your schema?
Yeah, I think that there is a role for rewards and sanctions definitely in schools. And excuse me, I'd say that the book, hopefully it's comes clear across in there that motivation is only part of the picture, and of course we need like a strong curriculum and a good assessment system, but also a really strong behavior management policy and systems within the school. But what rewards and sanctions often don't do are really pull on some of those environmental and experience levers that we talked about earlier, which are, for me, at the heart of motivation. And so, for example, you might offer a little Billy a reward of some kind or a sanction of some kind, but compared to the power, say, for example, of the social norms in his environment or the feeling of belonging, those things will pale in comparison. And I suppose the second thing to say is that sanctions and rewards are what we would, or what the research would traditionally call extrinsic motivators, or the source of that motivation is extrinsic. It's outside of, in terms of like thinking about intrinsic and extrinsic, I think the most helpful way to think about it is not in terms of whether it's in you or outside of you. I think that's kind of not a misinterpretation of that framework, but more in terms of like the source of the motivation itself. And so intrinsic is best thought of as like you being motivated to the object itself. And in teaching, that's the thing that you're trying to get pupils to learn, whereas rewards are trying to motivate you towards that reward itself. And that can create issues and problems further down the line, because you end up doing things to get the reward. You sort of game the system, as it were. And so really the book is all predicated on this idea that as far as possible, we want to orient pupils to want to invest in the actual thing itself. Now, the big challenge for teachers is that it's kind of hard to change the thing itself. We want pupils to learn about fractions on a Friday afternoon. If we substitute fractions...
Hearing about fractions is always fun. So fractions on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. So if we could very easily change motivation by substituting out fractions and just like learning about football. Little Billy would probably be up for that. But as educators, we know that fractions are really important. And so what we really need to do is to change the environment and Billy's past experiences so that he actually is motivated to learn about fractions and not just try to replace the object of the learning itself.
Right. Okay. So, so one thing that just on that subject, just whilst we're talking about motivation, so do you think there's nothing extrinsically wrong with being motivated towards, for instance, wanting to achieve a good set of exam results? That wouldn't be you wouldn't see that as detrimental.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, it's
no. Okay.
It's a valid aspiration. I suppose the thing that it might not do is it might not motivate you to put in sufficient effort in the moment.
Right.
If that makes sense. So, so like your local environment probably has a greater impact on your effort than a kind of aspirational goal that you hold. And so if in the moment you actually, for example, you hadn't been very successful in maths for a while, you didn't feel part of that classroom, the norm in the classroom was to not engage, then actually it doesn't matter how much you want to achieve in an exam, you're probably not going to put in that much effort because of the situation you find yourself in and the past experiences you've had in that context.
Right. Okay. It's going to be harder to do. So definitely see that. One of the things that that struck me reading your chapter on success is you talk about the need to attribute success correctly, and it reminded me a bit of Kluger and Denise's. I'll just wait for Peps to come back before I talk about this. But yeah, Peps, I was just saying, so the writing you did about success reminded me a little bit about Kluger and Denise's feedback intervention theory, that for students who are not achieving where we want them to achieve, the most important thing is that they are able to, the feedback is successful when it results in them thinking, okay, I'm going to actually invest greater effort trying to work out how to solve this particular problem. And so it doesn't matter so much what you do if it's not understood in that way, then the whole thing can go wrong. And that's something you really seem to be chewing at in this chapter. Do you want to say a little bit more about the way you think about attribution?
Yeah, sure. And it's, I suppose, what at the heart of all of this, at the heart of motivation itself, is this issue of perception. In that, like a lot of the way we a lot of the reasons that we either put in effort and invest attention in things or not are not because necessarily of the reality that we find ourselves in, but how we perceive that reality. And so, you know, past success is a subjective thing, and it depends on, for example, how we have framed success for ourselves in the past. And so two pupils who could have exactly the same experience, one of them could feel that they've been really successful and the other could feel that they've continually failed. And so how we, like feedback is a really central vehicle through which we can help pupils to develop more accurate attributions, for example. And so helping them see that they are, not only are they, you know, accurate or inaccurate in a particular example, but that through that feedback that you're helping them to understand that they can do better, I suppose, but also even further than that, they are part of the community.
Obviously, being part of the community, important. If the community believes in the same things that you do, then that's even better. I was doing a bit of summing of where I thought you were going with that, Peps.
Great. I'll let you sum up, David.
No. So, one of the things that I found quite interesting in that is the way you talk about the power of proficiency. And I'd be interested if you could summarize some of your thoughts on proficiency.
Sure. Well, this is like a really tricky thing for me to try and wrestle with in the book, is that the role of proficiency and how because essentially that is at the heart, I think, of motivation for me, is feeling success, but success in what? Well, really, it's success in the object of the lesson, the thing you're trying to learn, and the highest levels of success come whenever you feel like you're getting it, you're getting smarter, you're getting the hang of something, you're feeling proficient in something. And when you do, like, you dig into the literature around this, it kind of becomes clear that proficiency can be a really like powerful source of value in lots of different ways. So like even the most basic like feeling of being fluent at something can make you feel good. And so there's like a, from a neurological perspective, there's like a bit of a dopamine release that will encourage you to go back to that experience again. But then, all of the other things that come with proficiency as well, because you know more, there are more curiosity gaps. And so you see more opportunities for you to learn more. There's a sense of awe about the world because you understand what's going on. You feel a greater sense of agency because you can now act in the world if the information you have learned, if you understand how it can be used. So really, like for me, proficiency should be the thing that we are striving for as teachers, because it is the thing that can like power intrinsic motivation more than anything else.
Peps, the next of the drivers that you talk about is about routines, and I thought I really liked the way that you break this down into chains, cues, and rollouts. Could you describe that for our viewers so that they understand what chains, cues, and rollouts are all about?
Sure. So where to start with this? So I think it's like routine. If we kind of jump back a second and just talk about this whole investment piece. So motivation is about you investing in an opportunity that the teacher presents to you, which is going to be the object of learning, which is the thing we're trying to teach. Then we as human beings, even if we've been successful in the past, don't want to overinvest in things. We don't want to put in more effort than we think is going to be necessary. And actually, so if we can reduce the amount of effort, then we can, in some ways, increase the amount of motivation. Now, this is really tricky in school because we don't want to make things easier for pupils because they'll learn less. And so what we can do is create routines around certain parts of the learning experience. And I think the best way of conceptualizing this is thinking about building routines around the how of learning, but keeping the what of the learning open, as it were.
Right.
And so what that means is that the kind of any pedagogical processes or instructional processes that can or tend to repeat in your lessons, it's worth repeating them and building routines around them so that pupils can focus less on what's actually going on in the classroom, what's going to happen next, how do I respond to this, and focus more on the object, the content of that learning. Now, to build routines, there are kind of at least two parts, and the two main parts for me are a set sequence of events. So, for example, in the morning you get up, brush your teeth, then after brushing your teeth, you comb your hair or whatever. I don't know what people do in the morning, but he's got a sort of set sequence of actions, and that, like, we perform those time and time again. And what it means is actually when we're brushing our teeth or combing our hair or spraying deodorant, whatever it is, we don't have to think a lot about those things, and we can be thinking about our day and listening to the radio and all sorts of other things. So that's the chain, I'd say. Chain is the analogy of there being a set sequence of events.
Right.
But with every routine or habit, there is a cue that triggers that. And so for in the morning, often it's the alarm clock that goes off. The alarm clock goes off, and that is your cue to basically enact that chain of events. And so as soon as the alarm clock goes off, you just walk kind of blindly into that set of events that are really powerful, actually. If you think, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, you spray on the deodorant, sets you up really well for the day, and you do all of this without really thinking very much, and it means you can be thinking about other things. And all of this happened because of that tiny little beep that went off beside your bed whilst you were sleeping. And the same idea can be applied in classrooms. What we can do is, if we can look at areas of our teaching that regularly repeat, be intentional about thinking about what is the ideal set sequence of events that we want to happen in the classroom, and then think really carefully about the cue we want to use to prompt that sequence of events. And then in order to build a routine, all we have to kind of do is practice it or use it regularly. Do it lots and lots of times until it starts to become automatic. But the key is making sure that we always use the same cue. And then after a while, just like the alarm clock situation, as soon as the alarm clock goes off, pupils will be able to either come into the classroom in the same way they always have, or they'll be able to enter into a discussion routine in the classroom. And in both situations, they won't have to think much about what's going on. A default's a really helpful way of thinking about it. It's like, what do you want your classroom to fall back on? What things do you want your pupils to fall back on whenever there's ambiguity present? And so it's always great to have like a good default, I think, and then you can diverge from that whenever you want to.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so the next two, and it was interesting that when you introduced these, you combine them together. The nudging the norms and the other one that alliterates with B that I've momentarily forgotten, building belonging.
I spent so long trying to come up with like is it an acrostic? Is that the word?
It pays. It's a beautiful thing. So it's worth the effort, definitely. But so what would you say is that? So nudging norms is about the social norms that exist, and the idea of building belonging is making sure that individual students feel like that school is for them, that this classroom is somewhere where they can work hard and be safe and be successful. What's the dividing line between norms and belonging, would you say?
Ooh, good question. I'm not sure I've got the line exactly right. Those two chapters went around about the houses for a couple of years probably, and I think it's pretty fine. The way the way I'd say it is that we are susceptible to normalized behavior. So what we see other people doing is kind of something we see as being a good investment. If everyone else in the classroom is doing this, then it makes sense that this is going to be something that you probably want to do. It's kind of like a social proof argument. Okay, it's same that for your book, for example, when you see 20 people with 5 stars, more people are more likely to buy it compared to when you see 20 people who give it 1 star. But there's also like a norming aspect whereby it's lower risk to do the same things that other people are doing. The belonging is I'd say like the kind of technical way of looking at it is that norms are mediated by the sense of belonging you feel. So where a person feels like they don't really belong to a group, those norms won't actually have much of an impact. So if a pupil in a school, in a classroom, doesn't really identify that with that classroom, then it doesn't matter whether loads and loads of people are going to be doing certain things. They're going to not feel like they are part of that group, and so therefore want to go along with that behavior. And so the two operate very closely together. I think they need to happen together. You need to make sure that people feel part of not only the classroom but school for the effective norms to actually come through.
So one of the difficulties that can sometimes happen within individual classrooms, but certainly in schools, is that when there's a single individual that doesn't feel part of the group, then that doesn't tend to be a huge problem. But when there are enough individuals that band together to form a group in opposition to the main culture of the class or the school, then that can be a really intractable problem, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah. But even one dissenter. One dissenter can make a huge difference. Where you have 100% conformity, norms are really, really powerful. As soon as you have one person who's not doing that thing, then all of a sudden you start to question that as a norm. And then of course whenever you have the bulk of people, or you perceive that the bulk of people are not doing that norm, actually the norm becomes something else. And so it's not doing that thing is the norm, is the new norm, and so that's what you want to kind of follow. And the classic example that I think gets used often is in educational context is the teacher who says, "Oh, no one here has done their homework, this week," and actually what they're really doing is confirming the norm, affirming the norm that people don't do their homework around here, and so anybody who's in that classroom is going to be like perking up and thinking, "Oh, okay, if I want to be part of the group here and I want to imitate normal behavior, then I won't do my homework either."
Yeah, and it's not even as conscious as that, is it, Peps? It's just that people sort of pick up these cues and almost subconsciously go, "Oh, well, if a lot of people aren't doing their homework, probably not that big a deal."
Yeah.
Whereas if the framing that teachers give the norms is, everybody's done their homework, but I've been let down by one person, then they're much more likely to feel that more sharply as an indictment of their own behaviour.
Right, absolutely.
Okay. So whilst we wait for Peps to come back, Peps.
Yeah.
So the next question I had another question for you about norms.
Yeah.
I think what you had to say about the visibility of norms, I thought was very good.
Right.
Can you tell us about making norms visible?
Yeah. So again, like thinking about going back to the perception piece, in that like a lot of this is really about how pupils perceive reality, and actually, or how humans perceive reality, really. And so norms are just one of those things. Another thing that actually is kind of a perception of reality rather than the reality itself. And so, for example, where we in life, where we see people in magazines doing certain things, and we get exposed to them on television, it's very easy for us to think that that is the norm in life. And so that's kind of what celebrity culture does. And I suppose the same thing can happen in school, is that where examples of behavior are amplified to a certain extent, whether they're called out by the teacher or whether they are kind of spotlighted in some way by a teacher perhaps telling a story about that norm, those norms will basically be amplified. Their visibility will be increased. And so again, that then changes our perception. So for example, as a teacher, if not everyone in your class or as a leader, not everyone in your school is conforming to a certain norm, there are things that you can do to basically try to change people's perceptions before you're able to get everyone to fall into line first.
Okay, brilliant. And then the final driver is about buy-in. And I thought one of the most interesting things you had to say about buy-in was your thoughts around choice and its limitations. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Sure.
So there's kind of like a rich body of literature that suggests that when we have autonomy, we have a bit of a choice. Like we are more motivated. I'm sure you feel that. We all kind of feel that sense. However, this is really tough to implement in school because we have a curriculum, and there are certain ways that we need everyone to be behaving in order to be able to educate at scale, which is essentially what school is all about. Giving everyone the choice to learn whatever they want to learn and however they want to learn it really is not going to end up benefiting everyone. Like a single teacher would then have to distribute the resources that they have across 30 pupils in a very individual way, and so you could spend perhaps 2 minutes with every pupil rather than 60 minutes with all of them. And so there is an inherent tension with the idea of autonomy and schooling, as it were. And so I think the way around this for me is to not necessarily give students choice, but help them understand the choices that you are making on their behalf. As a teacher, you are an expert in that in the situation. You are employed as somebody who is take responsibility for them and who uses your expertise to help them to achieve their goals in their life and to improve society. And but one of the things I think that can very easily happen in school is that you can assume that the value of what you're teaching is obvious. Because it's kind of like a curse of knowledge thing. And so I think there's definitely room, certainly I've found room in my teaching to be more explicit about the value of the things I'm teaching and make sure that I tether what I am doing to kind of the longer term value of those things as well. And so a really helpful routine that I've seen people use in lessons is basically just to narrate the journey. So it's like, this is what we're going to be doing today. Sell the benefits. So this is why the things that we're going to be doing are of value to you. List them all, and then the kind of final thing I'd talk about is opting in. So giving pupils just a chance to take stock and giving them the chance to just kind of say, okay, yeah, I'm going to go along with that. And so that's, I think, for me about other than the get to have a choice about what essay you're writing or have a choice about how you're going to solve a particular mathematics problem. That for me is kind of the best that we can offer in terms of pupil choice, is providing them with the the rationale for what we're doing, and then giving them the kind of pseudo opportunity almost to decide how much effort they're going to like put in behind it.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things which I think sometimes some teachers maybe sometimes struggle with is that when students do say to them, "Oh, why are we doing this? This seems really pointless," and they end up defaulting to saying, "Well, I'm sorry, but it's in the exam." And that if that's the best you can do at selling the benefits, then you're probably not asking students, or you're not doing as well as you could at getting them to buy in with what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. What do you for English, when people's asked that about English? So why are we doing this? What's your response? Because you're in school these days.
Well, I tend to say that, and I'm not sure how successful it is, but the reason we're doing this is that we're making your brain a more interesting place to spend the rest of your life. And the more you know, of however much value it appears to have now, you will be able to think about it, and you cannot think about something that you don't know about. And I can't honestly say hand on heart that that's always successful with generating buy-in, but it has resulted over the years to some tolerant laughter.
Right, absolutely, yeah, and it'll work for some people. And this is the thing, like what we're kind of with this last driver, we're kind of drifting out of the less conscious drivers more towards a cognitive or conscious even metacognitive driver, and at that point, when people start to think a little bit more about what their aspirations are, they diverge quite a lot. And so, with your pitch, as it were, you're probably going to hit some pupils, but not them all, because we are motivated by different things at that stage. And so, I think, for the teacher who wants to try to sell the benefits of what they're doing, I think, throwing a whole load of spaghetti at the wall is possibly one of the best approaches, because some pupils will be, motivated by, earning more money in the future. Some pupils will be more motivated by just having a sharper brain in them.
And no doubt some pupils will be motivated by doing well in exams.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Peps, I've really enjoyed talking to you. So Motivated Teaching by Peps Mccrea is an absolutely top-notch introduction to the idea of motivation. Peps, do you have any, for people who've read your book and feel excited by it, but want something sort of maybe a bit more involved, and it goes into some of the many topics that you go into in a bit more detail. Have you got any recommendations for things that you'd point them towards next?
Well, you've read the book, David. There's, after every chapter, there's literally tens and tens of like further readings that I've kind of curated over the years. Again, if they head over to my website, pepsmccrea.com/motivation, I've kind of made a list of all of the top readers, the most accessible readers that are all kind of freely accessible. Those are good places all of those are good places to start, I would say.
Great, that's really helpful. And that this book really is, it's the tip of a huge iceberg, isn't it? That the process you've gone through of distilling so much, we get this sort of glimpse into the vastness of your mind, Peps, through this sort of little porthole, which is, I imagine for some teachers this is going to be revolutionary. It's going to change the way that they teach, and I would absolutely commend it. I think there's a lovely recommendation for one of your other books from Dylan William at the beginning, who says if you have a spare half hour or so, you could read Memorable Teaching from cover to cover. I doubt you'll find an educational book with more useful insights per minute of reading time, and that's a doubt I share. But the final thing I'd like to ask you about, Peps, because you tempt us in your introduction when you tell us about yourself. You say you've got multiple distracting tattoos, which you'll tell us about over a beer. Now, I happen to know you've had a beer over the course of the interview, and I wonder if Ed, to tell us anything about your multiple distracting tattoos.
Yeah, I've got one here, and there's a big line kind of heading up my arm all the way to my neck here. And I suppose this story here is that I wrote this book, Memorable Teaching, the one before Motivated Teaching, which really is a lot about, or a big piece of it is about reducing distractions. And then I go to do a conference for Research Ed or somewhere like that. And I get to the end of it and ask people to, any questions. And always the first question would be, Peps, what does that tattoo mean? And so, the epitome of distraction really is coming through.
You are a living, walking, talking distraction, Peps.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Not what not to do.
Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for helping us waste your time this afternoon.
Great.
And I wish you every success with the book. And I'm sure it's going to be, if the reviews that the previous instalments have garnered are anything to go by, I'm sure it's certain to go well. Peps Mccrea, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
You can run and hide, but you will find that where you go, the blues go. You may think